Montana Territory, August 1887. The sun was barely over the hills when Colter Hayes pulled his horse to a stop, dust settling around the hooves. Across the dry stretch of prairie, he saw her bare arms straining as she hauled a heavy iron bucket from the well, her dress clinging to her from sweat and grit. She staggered for a second under the weight, then straightened and carried on. Colter did not move. He just watched. She was alone. No ranch hands, no wagons. Just her, a broken-down barn behind her and a house with half its roof caved in. The place was dying and still she fought for it. He swung down from his saddle. She noticed him as he approached, setting the bucket down hard and reaching for the rifle leaning against the well post. "I do not want any trouble," she said, eyes steady, voice dry from heat and dust. She looked about 22, maybe 23. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid, loose strands stuck to her cheek. Colter raised his hands, not looking to cause any. She studied him for a long moment, then let the rifle rest again. "You lost." "No," he said, "just riding through." "Saw you working." She nodded once like that answer was enough, then turned to grab the bucket again. "What happened to this place?" he asked. She paused, looked over her shoulder at him. "You always ask strangers questions like that." "Only when I see a woman breaking her back on a ranch alone." Her grip on the bucket tightened. "My name's Rosalie Ellison. My father passed last winter. I tried to hold the place together, but the bank took it 3 weeks ago. I am still here because I do not know where else to go." Colter looked back at the house. The shutters hung crooked, fence posts sagged, but beneath the ruin he could see what it had been: good grazing land, a working well, and a layout that made sense. The bones of a real ranch. "Why are you still working it if it is not yours anymore?" Rosalie lifted the bucket. "Because I have nothing else and nobody's come to run me off yet." He stepped closer. "You have no family?" "None left." Silence stretched long. The wind stirred the dry grass. "How much was the debt?" he asked. She blinked. "What? The bank? How much did they say you owed?" She hesitated. $800. Colter nodded slowly. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked, wary now. He looked her straight in the eye. "Because I have $800. And I have been looking for land." She straightened. "You want to buy it?" "No," he said. "I want to give it back." She stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because I saw you pulling water for something you already lost." "That means something." Her eyes shone for a second and she blinked hard. "I do not even know your name." "Colter Hayes." Her lips parted like she might say something, but nothing came. She looked away to the house, to the sky. "I will pay the debt," he said. "But if I do, I am not just going to leave you out here to run yourself into the ground. I want to help you rebuild it, the right way." She looked back at him. "You want to stay?" He nodded. "If you will let me." Rosalie did not answer right away. Her fingers loosened around the handle of the bucket. Then, with a breath she had been holding too long, she said, "All right." He nodded once and offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. By the time the sun dipped low, Colter had ridden into town with what little dust-covered cash he had in his saddlebag. It took time to track down the banker, but he was firm and straight about it. He paid the debt in full and demanded the deed returned in Rosalie's name. "Is she your wife?" the banker asked. "No," Colter said. "But she is the kind of woman worth standing next to." He rode back under the stars, the land quiet under moonlight. When he reached the ranch, Rosalie was still awake, seated on the porch with her knees drawn up, a lantern beside her. He handed her the deed without a word. She unfolded it slowly, reading in the low glow. Her hand shook. "It is yours again," he said. "No more debt, no more bank." She looked up at him, her face open and raw in the lamplight. "Why are you doing this?" He sat down beside her. "Because I want to." "Because someone should." She looked away toward the dark outline of the barn. "I have not cried in a long time." "You do not have to now," he said gently. But a tear slipped down her cheek anyway. Colter reached over and brushed it away with the back of his fingers. She leaned into his hand for half a second before pulling away. There was something in the air, then something fragile and unspoken. But neither of them moved to name it. The next morning came hard and hot. Colter was already outside when Rosalie stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. "You sure you want to dig through this mess?" she asked, handing him a mug. He took it, nodded. "You sure you want me here?" She looked at him, eyes calm and clear in the morning light. "Yes, I do." They started with the barn. The roof needed bracing, and the stalls had to be cleared of rotted straw. They worked side by side, sunburned and blistered, but neither complained. When they stopped for water, Rosalie sat beside him in the shade, their shoulders brushing. "You always been a cowboy?" she asked. "Since I was 15. My folks died in a fever. I took to the trail and never looked back," she nodded. "I was raised here, learned how to ride before I could write." He looked at her. "You are tough, Rosalie," she met his eyes. "So are you, Colter." By week's end, the barn stood solid again. They shared meals in the half-repaired house, laughter coming easier now. One night, as they sat by the fire, she handed him a plate of beans and their fingers touched. He did not move, neither did she. "I have not had someone to eat with in a long time," she said quietly. "I have not had someone worth staying for in a long time," he answered. She looked at him, and he saw it then how far she had come from that first morning. How much she had let him in. Colter reached for her hand. She let him. And they stayed like that, side by side in the firelight, the silence full and good. He kissed her 2 days later. Not in a rush, not in a storm, but slow, standing out by the corral as the sun set behind them. He had just finished mending a gate when she came to him, hair loose, lips parted like she had something she wanted to ask but could not quite say. He touched her cheek. She leaned in. The kiss was quiet and warm and steady. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I think I am falling for you." He smiled. "That makes two of us." Rosalie took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Then let us make this place ours." 3 weeks after Colter paid the debt, the rains came. Not heavy, just enough to soften the earth and turn the air damp. Rosalie stood at the edge of the pasture one morning, watching steam rise off the horses' flanks as they grazed. The wind carried the scent of wet sage and old ash from a burned fence line. Colter stepped beside her, brushing dried mud from his gloves. "I've been thinking about the north field," he said. "Looks like good ground for oats." She didn't look away from the horses. "My father always planted rye there. Said it kept better through winter." He studied the way her arms crossed, thoughtful, not closed. "You want to stick with that?" "I want to do what works," she said. Then after a pause, "But I'd like to try oats." That settled it. He led her to the north field a little after noon. The sun had broken through, warming the backs of their necks. They knelt down together, digging into the damp soil with their fingers. "It's looser than I thought," she said. "Good sign," he replied. "Means the roots won't have to fight so hard." She nodded, then looked toward the distant tree line. "I used to ride out there when the house got too loud. Sometimes I'd stay until the moon came up." "You miss them?" "Not all of them," she said. "But I miss the sound of someone else's boots by the door." He didn't answer, just pressed his palm into the dirt and let the silence settle. That evening, she didn't sit on the porch. She waited in the kitchen, apron smeared with flour, sleeves rolled. The smell of biscuits hung in the air, warm and thick. "You cook?" she asked when he walked in. "I've burned more than I've made," he said. She handed him a bowl of greens anyway. "Then you can start by not burning these." He set the table while she plated the food. They didn't speak much until halfway through the meal when she reached for the butter and said, "I saw you taking apart the pump yesterday." "It's rusted through," he said. "I'll need to refit the pipe, maybe line it with tar." She set the tin down. "You know a lot about fixing things." "Only because I've broken enough of them." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You ever stay in one place long?" "No." "Why now?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because this place has roots. And because you didn't ask me to leave." Something shifted across her face, then not surprise, not fear. Just a quiet settling, like a door left open finally swinging shut. After supper, they walked the fence line, checking for breaks. She carried a lantern, the light swaying across the wire. He carried a spool and hammer. "You think we'll have calves by spring?" she asked, stopping to tighten a post. "If we get the herd rebuilt in time." "I've got one neighbor who might sell," she said, "but his prices run high. I've got a few heads stabled 2 counties east. I could bring them here." She looked at him then, the lantern light catching the curve of her cheek. "You do that. They're good stock, and it's better than letting them stand idle." The lantern flickered in the wind. She didn't look away. "I keep wondering when this all starts to feel real." He touched her elbow lightly. "Maybe it already does." Later, when they reached the house again, she paused before the steps. "You should sleep inside tonight," she said. I don't mind the loft. I do, she said. It's getting cold. So he followed her in, and she pulled a spare quilt from the trunk. He unrolled his bedroll beside the stove. She didn't linger, but before she turned to her room, she glanced back once. Good night, Colter. Good night, Rosalie. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. He lay awake a while, listening to the creak of the rafters, the wind pushing soft against the shutters. Somewhere in the dark, he heard her shift in her bed, the quiet sound of breath steadying into sleep. He closed his eyes. He was home. The wind came down sharp off the crazy mountains, rattling the loose panes in the east-facing window. Colter stood in the lean-to they'd turned into a rough makeshift tack room, rubbing linseed oil into the saddle leather with slow, even strokes. When Rosalie stepped through the doorway, her cheeks were flushed, and her braid had half come undone. I found 2 fence posts split clean at the base, she said. Not rot, something hit him hard. Colter set the cloth aside. Elk maybe, they're moving through early. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Could have sworn I heard a rider last night. Way out near the tree line, he watched her face. You think someone's been watching the place? I don't know, she said, but I've learned not to ignore that feeling when it comes. He nodded once, reached for his coat. I'll ride out that way before dusk, leave a lantern lit in the window. If I don't come back by full dark, I'll wait up, she said, quiet but firm. The mare's hooves made little sound on the damp earth. Colter followed the creaked eyes sweeping low scrub and alder stands where the light thinned. A crow burst from a pine ahead, startling his horse. He calmed her with a hand, then dismounted at her rise overlooking a swale where the grass grew thick and undisturbed. He found the tracks near a seep hoof prints fresh, heading west. Not elk, not cattle, shod horse, heavier weight. He rode back after sundown, the lantern already burning in the front window. Rosalie met him on the porch, her eyes searching him fast. One rider, he said as he stepped down. Didn't come close to the house, but he's been circling the far pasture. She looked out toward the dark beyond the fence. What would they want with this place? It's barely standing. Maybe they don't want the land, he said. Maybe they want to make sure you don't keep it. She didn't flinch. Then they're too late. The next morning, she was already in the garden when he came down. Her skirt was damp with dew, hands sunk deep in the soil. She glanced up but didn't speak until he crouched beside her. I used to think owning a thing meant it was safe, she said, pressing down a line of bean seeds with her thumb. Turns out nothing stays yours unless you're ready to fight for it. He watched her hands work. You're not alone in that fight anymore. She turned her head, brushed a strand of hair back with her wrist. No, I'm not. The sun climbed higher. They moved to the stable, working in tandem without needing to speak. When the new gelding balked at the halter, Rosalie stepped in, calm and sure, until the animal yielded. You've got away with them, Colter said, adjusting the cinch. My mother taught me patience, she said. Told me every creature's got its own kind of hurt, and you can't rush them past it. He stilled, looking at her. Do you? She met his gaze. I've got more than I used to, not because it got easier, just because I had to. That night the wind dropped and the sky went clear. Stars scattered across the black like dust on velvet. They sat by the fire smaller than usual, no words passing between them. At one point, Rosalie reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm and calloused. I used to think love came all at once, she said, voice low. Like lightning. But this, it's quieter. He turned to her, his hand tightening gently around hers. Maybe quieter's stronger. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I want to build a life here, not just survive it. We will, he said. Together. She didn't answer, but her hand stayed in his and her breath slowed against his sleeve. When he rose to bank the fire for the night, she stood with him and neither let go. Inside, she paused at her bedroom door. I don't want to sleep alone tonight, she said. He looked at her, steady and sure. Then you won't. They crossed the threshold together, nothing rushed, nothing spoken. Just hands learning shape and warmth, and years of hollow winter giving way to something real. By late September, the first frost had dusted the tops of the cottonwoods along the creek, and the mornings cracked sharp beneath their boots. Colter rose before dawn, hauling a lantern out to the shed where Rosalie had laid out the seed sacks the night before. He found her already there, kneeling near the grindstone, sleeves rolled, sleeves damp, the faint white of her breath catching in the lamp light. "You sleep any?" he asked, setting the lantern down. "Some," she said. "Had a dream about the cellar caving in, woke up and checked it." Just an old stump root pressing through the wall. He crouched beside her. "The house still holding, for now," she said, brushing her hands clean. "I want to shore up the south wall before the snows come. My father always said that's where the wind finds its way in first." Colter opened a seed sack, checking the grain. "There's a man over near Reed Point, builds with stone. If we can trade for the work, it'll hold longer than timber." "What would we trade?" "I've got a double yoke harness in the tack room, still sound, might be worth something to him." She nodded, considering. "You always this good with barter," he gave a half grin. "You learn when you've ridden too many seasons with nothing but a spare shirt and a busted stirrup." Rosalie stood and dusted off her skirt. "I'll boil water for coffee. We'll need it before the east field gets too hard to till." They worked in silence most of that morning, save for the scrape of iron against earth and the soft pull of reins as they guided the draft team in tight, looping rows. Around mid-morning, a hawk passed low overhead, its shadow cutting between them just as Colter paused to adjust the blade depth on the plowshare. Rosalie stopped walking, watching it fly. "My brother used to track them," she said after a moment. "Said they always knew what was dying before it hit the ground." Colter didn't speak, just waited. "He fell from a horse when I was 16, broke his back, never walked again. We kept him home until the end, but he hated the stillness. Said it made the walls louder." He reached over then, not touching, just letting his hand rest on the plow beam between them. "You carry a lot. I don't set it down too often." "You don't have to set it down," he said. "Just let someone carry it with you." She didn't answer, but she kept her eyes on his a long time, and when she turned back to the team, the line of her shoulders had softened. That evening, Colter returned from the creek with a brace of trout, caught on bone hook and twine. Rosalie met him by the porch, a small bundle clutched in her hands. "I stitched this for you," she said, offering a folded square of muslin. "It's nothing fine, just something for your saddlebag." He unfolded it carefully. A square cloth hand-embroidered with a pine branch and a single stitched word. "Stay." His voice caught slightly. "You made this." "I've never made anything for a man before," she said, eyes flicking to his. "Not one who stayed." He stepped close. "I've never had a reason to." She reached up then, fingers finding the edge of his collar. "You're the first man I've known who walks toward the hard things." He bent his head, brushing his lips against her temple. "You're the first woman who made me want to." That night, he brought the trout inside, and she set the table without saying much. They ate beneath the soft creak of the rafters, the smell of pine smoke and fish skin lingering in the air. After the dishes were stacked, she reached for his hand across the table. "I want to build something stronger than just soil and wood," she said. "I want a life with weight, something that doesn't blow apart when the wind changes." Colter laced his fingers with hers. "Then we'll build it. Brick by brick, day by day." She stood slowly, pulling him with her, and together they crossed the room, the fire behind them burning low, upstairs. The bed waited unmade but warm. They undressed with the kind of quiet that comes only from trust, not hesitation. When he kissed her, it was with the full knowledge of everything she had lost and everything she had chosen to keep. Her hands were steady on his shoulders, her mouth sure and open against his. No words passed between them after that, only breath, only warmth. And nothing in the world felt unfinished. The last of the rye went into the ground under a high blue sky streaked with mares' tails. Rosalie tied her hair with a strip of linen and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. The soil, cool and dark beneath her boots, had taken the seed like it remembered its purpose. Colter tamped down the final row behind her, his shirt clinging to his back, the muscles in his forearms tightening with each push of the hoe. When they finished, she didn't speak right away. Just stood, breathing deep, scanning the horizon like it might give her some sign that she hadn't made a mistake believing in this. Colter leaned on the handle. "You thinking about your father?" "No," she said. "I'm thinking how strange it feels to plant something and not be afraid it'll be taken." He nodded. "You've earned that safety." "I didn't earn you," she said. "You came out of nowhere." I came because I needed somewhere to stop running, he said. You gave me reason to. She glanced sideways at him, the corners of her mouth just barely lifting. That old mare of yours still limps after long rides. She's been through worse and kept going, he replied. They walked back to the house in silence, boots dusted with dry earth. The porch creaked under their weight and Rosalie paused before stepping inside. There's a quilting frame in the attic, she said, her voice low. It was my mother's. I thought to trade it once back when things were thinner, but I couldn't. Colter dropped his hat onto the hook. You want to bring it down, she nodded. I've got scraps enough for a start. They spent the afternoon in the parlor, moving furniture to clear the space. Rosalie fetched the frame, and together they stretched muslin over it, their hands brushing now and then as they worked. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching in the floating bits of cotton that hung in the air like pollen. What kind of pattern? He asked, watching her thumb through fabric pieces. My mother favored stars, she said. I want something steadier. Something that doesn't drift. She settled on a log cabin pattern, the center square read hearth and home and each strip radiating outward in careful symmetry. Colter helped cut the pieces as she placed them, her fingers quick and certain. Did she teach you to sew? He asked. Some, Rosalie said. But she died before I was old enough to finish a quilt. I always told myself I'd finish one when I had a home of my own. He nodded, not speaking. By evening, they had the first block done. Rosalie stood, stretching her back, and walked to the window. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the cottonwoods and casting long shadows across the pasture. You remember that creek bend near the tree line? She asked. He stood beside her, where the elk tracks were. There's a flat spot there, she said. Clear, good light. I think it'd make a fine place for a wedding. Colter didn't answer right away, just looked at her, really looked in the amber light of the dying day. Are you asking? He said. She turned to him, steady. I am. He reached for her hand, wrapped it in his. Then yes. I'll marry you there or anywhere you want. She leaned into him, her cheek against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her waist. Outside, the wind shifted. The weather was turning, but the land felt still and sure beneath them. They married with autumn leaves falling slow around them. A handful of neighbors gathered beneath the bare cottonwoods. Rosalie wore a dress she'd stitched from old calico, and Colter wore his best shirt, the cuffs freshly mended. The preacher spoke few words, and they said even fewer, but their vows were clear, spoken not in grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty of two people who had already chosen each other long before the words were spoken. After the ceremony, they served stew and cornbread from a pot hung over a fire. Laughter rose, soft and warm. Someone played a fiddle, and Colter danced with her once, barely swaying in the grass, his hand at her back, her breath against his neck. That night, in the house they had rebuilt board by board, they sat by the fire, her quilting frame leaning in the corner, a single candle burning low. We'll need to add a room come spring, she said, her hand resting lightly against her stomach. He nodded, his hand covering hers. We'll build it strong. She tilted her face to his, her eyes full and lit with the kind of peace that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with endurance. I love you, Colter Hayes. He kissed her, slow and certain. And I'll love you every day this land lets me wake beside you. Outside, the wind calmed. Inside, the fire burned on, steady and warm, and in the silence that followed, there was no grief, no running, no fear, only the quiet sound of two hearts at rest. They never left that land. Come spring, the child was born in the back room, just as the first shoots of green pushed through the rye. They named him Elias, and he had her eyes and his father's stillness. The neighbors came with baskets and blankets, and no rider ever circled their fence again. Years passed. The barn stood firm. The house held through snow and summer heat. The quilt grew, square by square, until it covered the bed where they slept side by side for over 40 winters. And when they were old, their hands worn and their hair gone silver, they still rose each morning to the same land, the same porch, the same kind of love earned, steady, and never once undone.